Now 2 Samuel, and David is a great hero, and he's someone God's people should follow. And this point is being drilled in over and over and over again. But if you take 1st and 2nd Samuel as a whole, the reason these books were written is so that God's people would always follow the sons of David as their kings, despite, and there's this qualification we make when we talk about the purpose of these two books, despite David's shortcomings and his sins. So God doesn't make the case like he doesn't make the case for Peter, that you should follow what Peter says because he's perfect, right? Peter denies Jesus. And in the same way, God makes the point that we should follow David and sons of David as our kings, not because they're perfect, but even despite their sins. And so we look today at how we deal with that. We begin to look today at how we deal with that, as David is not in his most sparkling, bright, righteous moment in this text. So 2 Samuel chapter 11, beginning in verse 1. This is God's word, eternally true. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, "Isn't this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. She had purified herself from her uncleanness. Then she went back to her home. The woman conceived and sent word to David, saying, "I am pregnant." So David sent this word to Joab, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." And Joab sent him to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab was, how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, "Go down to your house and wash your feet." So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. But Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all his master's servants, and did not go down to his house. Then David was told, Uriah did not go home. He asked him, "Haven't you just come from a distance? Why didn't you go home?" Uriah said to David, "The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my master Joab and my lord's men are camped in the open fields. How could I go to my house and eat and drink and lie with my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing." Then David said to him, "Stay here one more day, and tomorrow I will send you back." So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. At David's invitation, he ate and drank with him. And David made him drunk. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep on his mat among his master's servants. He did not go home. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In it, he wrote, "Put Uriah in the front line where the fighting is fiercest. Then withdraw from him so that he will be struck down and die." So while Joab had the city under siege, he put Uriah at a place where he knew the strongest defenders were. When the men of the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite was dead. Joab sent David a full account of the battle. He instructed the messenger, "When you have finished giving the king this account of the battle, the king's anger may flare up, and he may ask you, 'Why did you get so close to the city to fight? Didn't you know they would shoot arrows from the wall? Who killed Abimelech, son of Jerubbesheth? Didn't a woman throw an upper millstone on him from the wall so that he died in Thebez? Why did you get so close to the wall?' If he asks you this, then say to him, 'Also, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead.'" The messenger set out, and when he arrived, he told David everything Joab had sent him to say. The messenger said to David, "The men overpowered us and came out against us in the open, but we drove them back to the entrance to the city gate. Then the archers shot arrows at your servants from the wall, and some of the king's men died. Moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead." David told the messenger, "Say this to Joab. Don't let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as the other. Press the attack against the city and destroy it. Say this to encourage Joab." When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. After the time of mourning was over, David had her brought to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. The Lord sent Nathan to David. When he came to him, he said, there were two men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb that he had bought. He raised it, and it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, "As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over, because he did such a thing and had no pity." Then Nathan said to David, "You are the man. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave your master's house to you and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you the house of Israel and Judah. And if all this had been too little, I would have given you even more. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now therefore, the sword shall never depart from your house, because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own. This is what the Lord says. Out of your own household, I am going to bring calamity upon you. Before your very eyes, I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you, and he will lie with your wives in broad daylight. You did it in secret, but I will do this thing in broad daylight before all Israel." Here ends our reading. There's a response of thankfulness that's printed for you there in your bulletins. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Thanks indeed. Let's pray. So you see the title here, When Church Officers Sin. Don't be nervous. There's no announcement coming. Nothing to confess here except ordinary old regular sins for me and the officers of the church. But we hit this topic because we preach through the Bible, and this is upon us, and this equips us for how we handle when church officers sin. And I hope that it's something you never have to deal with, and that you can help other people with, as that unfortunately happens within the church, because church officers, as we'll talk about, have sin natures too, and sometimes succumb to them. Sometimes husbands have a second family in another place. What if you were growing up and you found out that your dad was one of these people? He had a secret family in another. You thought he was just traveling for business and gone during the week, and you find out that he has a whole second family. I know a guy, he's a PCA pastor, and his dad, he found out, not a believer, had a whole second family in another city. And in fact, one of his children in the other family had the same name as he, Wouldn't that be weird? Yeah. And so he had to process all that, and I think he's been in a good place on that for a while. But just the surprise of that would be funny. How do you deal with that when you find that out about that person whom you respect a lot, your dad? Or maybe in a more humorous note, maybe there's somebody you respect a lot. Maybe he's the best boss you've ever had, or he's some person that you really admire, and you're a lifelong Carolina fan, and you know what's coming. And you find out that he went to Duke, and his dad went to Duke, and he roots for Duke, and then he hates Carolina. How do you feel? You still like this guy? You still like this guy? How do you deal with that when you get this bad information about somebody you know? Today we cover something a shade like these scenarios, and we're covering just the first half of this account. It's a much longer account, but just for the sake of picking some things apart and being the most helpful, we're getting at the sin and the rebuke. And next week we'll get to the response to this. What does David do with all this? But for now we're just kind of halfway in between, thinking about how we respond, how we think about this when we're alerted to the fact that, church officers can sin too. And sometimes in a way that's drastic or that affects things deeply. So number one here, if you'd like to fill up blanks in an outline, you're welcome to do that. If you want to just listen, you can just listen. That's okay too. So God says to you and to me, realize you're ordained leaders, elders and deacons. We're not ordained because of established perfection. They weren't ordained because of established perfection in Christ's likeness and sinlessness. That's not why they were ordained. But they were ordained because of an established heart for God and care for his sheep. And this was very much the case in an exemplary kind of way with David. An established heart for God, not a sinlessness, but an established heart for God and care for his sheep. In chapter 5, it's close enough, you can even look back. In chapter 5 here, verse 2, when David is made king over all God's people, and he's ordained to that office of king over all God's people, Judah and Israel both, which Nathan reminds David of, that God had put him as king, not over of his own people, Judah, but also of all Israel, all 12 tribes. But what they say to him is this, they reference this, that God ordains him to be king to shepherd God's people Israel. To shepherd God's people Israel. That was part of being a leader, to shepherd them. Okay? Chapter 7, verse 8. God says in what we call the Davidic covenant, the covenant to David, where God establishes the kingship of David and his sons to provide leadership for God's people forever, including today. God says to David at this time, chapter 7, verse 8, I took you from the flock. You were a shepherd, literally a shepherd, taking care of sheep. I took you from the flock to be ruler or shepherd over my people. So I've been training you, David, with these sheep, which you couldn't harm too badly. Or if that you goofed, it was just a sheep that got eaten by a wolf or a bear or a lion. But I was training you so that you could take care of my people. So 7:8 there, I took you from the flock to be ruler over my people Israel. Or 1 Samuel 13:14, when God is defrocking, when God is taking from Saul the kingship through Samuel the prophet. Samuel pronounces this in 1 Samuel 13:14, that God was giving the kingship, taking it away from Saul and giving it to someone after God's own heart. So God had someone picked out. That's why God ordains David to this office of king, because David was a man after God's own heart. He cared about the things God cared about. He cared about God's people. He didn't care about his own prominence, like Saul was caring about at this time when he's rebuked by Samuel in 1 Samuel 13. And so that's true of your ordained leaders today. They're put over, deacons and elders are put in office, not because they have an established pattern of sinlessness, no sin at all, not because they don't have sin natures. They do, but because they have a heart after God. They care about the things God cares about. They care for God himself, and they care about God's sheep, Jesus' sheep, the people over whom he shepherded. And so they come into office to shepherd them by teaching. They come into office to serve them by deaconing, or the word deacon actually means serve. And so because they care for God's sheep. So that's number one there. Your ordained leaders, the elders and deacons, are ordained because of a heart for God and care for his sheep, not because of an established pattern of sinlessness. We'll qualify this as we go through. Number two, realize your ordained leaders are not and will not be perfected in Christ-likeness in this life. They are not perfected, nor will they be perfected in this life. So the moment they take their dying breath, they will have a sin nature. They will not be perfected. We read it from 1 John 3. It says, when we see Jesus face to face, we will be like him. We will be as he is. We read today and declared our faith in what Scripture teaches us about what happens when we die. And when we die, our bodies stay here. They rest in the grave till the resurrection, till Jesus comes back second time and raises our bodies to be with our souls. But at our death, the souls of the believers are at their death made perfect in holiness. But they're not made perfect in holiness before their death. The benefits believers receive at their death include being perfected or completely matured in holiness, being set apart from sin. Holy means to be set apart. And to be perfected in holiness means to be set apart from sin completely. And that happens when we die. When our souls go up and we see Jesus face to face, we are like he is. And so don't expect that from your church officers. A sinless perfection, a complete maturity. In other words, your pastor still likes the Ohio State Buckeyes. That's part of my sinful immaturity, that I still care about things like that and get a little bit offended if you're happy when I associate myself with them, lose, even though I never went there. All right, so realize that your leaders will not be perfected in Christ's likeness in this life. Second line there for you, realize that the gospel of Jesus tells us that all Christians, the gospel is this message that all Christians, though their aim is Christ-likeness, all Christians will continue to sin in this life. That's what Paul moans over in Romans 7, the passage my wife calls the doobie-doo passage. Paul says, I do the things I don't want to do, even though I know they're not good, but I do them anyway, and because of sin within me, O wretched man that I am. Paul describes how we struggle now, because we have God's Spirit in us. We've been regenerated. We've been given spiritual life. We know what's good, and we're aimed at being Christ-like, but we still have this sinful nature within us, and so we struggle. And we see a temptation, we say, I know that's bad for me, but maybe this time. But maybe that'll work for us, right? Maybe that'll work for me. Maybe this time it'll be for my good. And then we walk in that and we go, and it's awful for us. And we feel stupid. Satan's not patting us on our back when we walk with him into temptation. As soon as we walk into it, he makes fun of us. He brings the consequences as full as the Lord will let him bring upon us. He brings them to us. He's not desiring our good. It's like the bullies who are trying to make the weaker kid do something and say, oh, do it, you'll be cool. And then as soon as they do it, they make fun of him and get as many people to laugh as possible. Okay? So all Christians, though our aim is Christ-likeness, which we see in 1 John 1, to walk in the light, to walk as Jesus did, to live as Jesus did. All Christians are trying to walk like Jesus, but still, John says there in 1 John 1, 6 through 8, if someone is not confessing their sins, that's a sign they're not a believer. That's counterintuitive to us, right? And that's what John was dealing with in the church in probably Ephesus, to which he writes 1 John. There were people in the church saying, oh, I don't sin anymore. You should follow me. And John says, no, if someone's saying they don't sin anymore, they're walking in darkness. They don't have fellowship with us. They're not a believer. You should not follow them. Because those who are of Jesus, who have Jesus serving as an atoning sacrifice for their sins, are confessing their sins. That's a mark of the Christian, that we confess our sins. So know that about all Christians. We're commanded to confess, and that's going to be something true of us all our lives. And so we all collectively say, duh, because we know ourselves. We know we sin every day. Okay, so just know that's true of you, and know that your officers are like you. Church officers are like you. They have the sin nature as well and will continue to sin. Now, number three. One important thing that balances our understanding of sins and the imperfections of ordained leaders next week. We'll get to it. Okay? We'll get to how we balance this. When an ordained leader sins, how do we deal with it? How do we balance that? Okay, so just in short, we're not telling you, well, we'll get to it now. Number four. Never condone, that's C-O-N, and then the word done, D-O-N-E. Never condone the sin of a leader, for God does not. God never condones the sin of a leader. Even the greatest human leader, perhaps, is probably either David or Moses, right? Outside of Jesus. He's the one, Jesus compares himself to David all the time. David is the pinnacle of the Old Testament. Okay? And Jesus comes and he takes over for David as king over the people. Okay? We in 20th and 21st century look at Moses way too much. Okay? David is the pinnacle because David is the one who helps us to follow Moses while he's protecting, and as king, protecting and providing for us. And that's what Jesus does too. But never condone the sin of a leader, for God does not. Look at a couple of verses here. Chapter 11, 27, the very last verse of chapter 27. God lets us know as he inscripturates, as the Holy Spirit inscripturates this for us. He lets us know clearly what God thinks of all this. Is it okay? I mean, David's a king. He's done a lot of great things for God's people. He deserved to be able to kick up his feet and not go to battle. He'd been fighting so much. He went against Goliath all by himself. All these things. Should we just excuse this? And we read in verse 27, they're God's clear evaluations of David's actions, but the thing David had done displeased the Lord. No excuses. It's Nick Saban's rat poison. Doesn't matter what you've done in the past. Okay? Doesn't matter what you've done in the past. What you need to be focused on is what you're doing now and what's in the future. Okay? And God looks back at what David's done and he says, you know what? It doesn't matter what he's done in the past. That's all great. Okay? But what matters is now, and he's displeased me greatly. He's displeased me greatly. So God calls sin, sin. Okay? And you and I should do that too in our own lives. When we sin, don't make excuses for it. Don't say, oh, it's not so bad because, and then draw all these circumstances around it. I only hit him in the face because he hit me in the face. No, God says, don't return evil for evil. I returned evil. That was sin. Okay? What I did was sin. Okay, so God calls sin, sin, so should we. God calls David's sin here. Likewise, chapter 12, verses 1 through 12 is all God calling David and his actions sinful here. Okay, God sends his prophet Nathan to David, and then look specifically in chapter 12, verse 9. Find that there. Chapter 12, verse 9. Through Nathan, God communicates this. He calls what David did, David's despising the word of the Lord, and David's doing what was evil. David, when you did this, you were despising the word of the Lord. This is the same word despising with Eli's sons, who were despising the sacrifices, despising the worship of the Lord, and they weren't doing the sacrifices rightly. They were taking portions of sacrifices that people would bring for themselves to eat. But David despises the word of the Lord, and furthermore, Nathan says, and you've done what is evil. So let's review David's sins here. One big thing we see right here in verse 1 of chapter 11. One of the things that Samuel had warned God's people about, they asked for a king like the nations. Not a king like God wanted. God wanted his people to have a king. Deuteronomy 17. He prescribed it in Moses. When you get into the land, you're to have a king. Okay? So this is God's will, that they have a king. But so it's Deuteronomy 17 before they even go into the promised land. But then in 1 Samuel 8, the people come to Samuel and say, we want a king like the nations. Key phrase, like the nations. And Samuel comes back to the people at the Lord's behest and says to the people the word of the Lord, which is this. If you get a king like the nations, here's what he'll do. He'll take your daughters as his wives. He'll take your best bakers. He'll take the best produce from your fields. He'll send your sons. He'll conscript your sons into his army, and he'll send them out to do his battles. He'll create high taxes for you to build a big palace for himself. But if you really want this, the Lord will give you this guy. And they say, yes. Give us a king like the nations. And so the Lord gives them Saul. And Saul does all those things. Saul's never in the front of the army leading, right? In fact, there are many cases where people have to come to Saul and he's in the back of the troops and say, you know what, there's all this ruckus going on here. Because he can't even see it. He's so far back, putting the sons of Israel out in front of him so that he's protected instead of going out in battle first like David always did. And so right from the get-go here in verse 1, we see he's sinning by not doing his role as king. Leading the troops in the battle. Laying down his life for the sheep, like he did against Goliath. Like he had done in all the other battles. He goes first like Jesus did for us. Jesus goes first and he faces death before we get there. And so David abandons his responsibility as king and he hangs out in Jerusalem. He sends Joab and all Israel. Everyone else go out. I'm going to hang out here. So that's David's sin number 1 in verse 1. Then in verses 2 through 5, David sins in adultery. Commandment 7, he breaks. And then verse 17, God pins him specifically with the murder of Uriah the Hittite. He says, you killed him, David. You killed him. You sent him out. That was your design. That was your intent. Yeah, it was at the hands of somebody on top of the wall of this Ammonite city, but you did it. And you instructed Joab to set him up to die. And so David's guilty of murder, and God pins him with murder in 6 through 17, 12:9 as well. Is where Nathan names it as murder. In chapter 11, 18 through 12:6, we see David's guilty of injustice and callousness to others' pain. The king was the ultimate judge. He was the supreme court in the land. We see this with Solomon. The hard cases come to the king, okay, just like they had to Moses after he talks to Jethro. The hard cases come to the king, and the king was responsible, the final word of justice in the land, and David is not executing justice in the land, and he's exercising callousness to people's pain. And so you see that in his attitude. He sends this message back to Joab and says, oh yeah, people die in battle, instead of mourning over these people who have died in battle. And then Bathsheba, her response, she's mourning over the death of her husband. She's not like, oh, that abuser, he's finally dead. Great, I get to be wife of the king now, maybe. No, she mourns over her husband. And everything appropriate. And David even waits till after her period of mourning is over before he picks her up, because he knows he's done wrong and he kind of wants that to settle there. But callous to his people's pain, not caring, just looking out for himself. What do I want? Like Samson, right? Bring her to me, for she looks good. That's what he told his parents. Chapter 12, verse 4. He steals Uriah's wife. Yeah, it's brought up. Isn't this, and Bathsheba mostly here, in one verse she's called Bathsheba, but the rest of the time she's called Uriah's wife. That's to drive into us that David sinned in adultery. This was not even some single young lady in his kingdom, and he was just committing adultery himself by taking on to himself more than one woman. But he was actually stealing someone else's wife. He was defrauding his brother, in the words of 1 Thessalonians 4. And then 12:4, he coveted Uriah's wife, that is Uriah's ewe lamb. He says, I want that one over there that belongs to someone else. 12:6, David condemns himself unknowingly. He has no pity. The improper sense of justice and kindness and what's right. And then 12:7, the sin of ungratefulness. And Nathan reviews in chapter 12, verse 7, how ungrateful David has been. I took you from the flock, God says, and I made you king over, I delivered you from Saul, I made you king over Judah and Israel, and I would have given you even more. And so David's ungrateful. He doesn't live in gratefulness to the Lord and walk in his commands in this event in his life. So that's David's sins. Interestingly, Jesus does the opposite of all these things. Jesus goes to the cross in front of us. He faces death and he conquers death in front of us instead of hanging back and letting us go through it first. Jesus is faithful to us. We are his spouse. He doesn't go after other people and abandon us, the bride of Christ, the church. He does the opposite of murder to us. And instead of allowing us to experience death as we should, he gives us new life. The opposite of David. David makes sure that Uriah the Hittite experiences death. Jesus makes sure that we don't, at least as much as possible. If he comes back before we die, then we won't. That'll be great. Jesus has pity on us. He looks at us in our unsaved state, in our lack of desire to be right with him, and he has pity. He sends his Spirit. He regenerates us, gives us new life, gives us a new heart, gives us eyes to see and ears to hear so we can understand the peril we're in and the grace that's being offered to us. Jesus has pity on us as king, which David did not by his own pronouncement. And then Jesus is grateful to the Lord for making him king, even if that requires his death. So not my will, Father, but yours be done. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. He's grateful and obedient to the Lord, knowing that the Lord is giving him kingship over all his people and not forgetting this, and so being forever obedient to his Father. So A in your outline there. Never condone the sin of a leader, for God does not. Yet, A, think on these leaders with recognition of your own sin. Think on these leaders with recognition of your own sin and treat them with gentle grace and care. When a leader who's ordained over the church falls into sin that's harmful like this, like David, treat them with gentle grace and care. Luke 6 there, Jesus says, when you have sawdust in your eyes and you can't see, don't point out when someone else has sawdust in his eyes, don't point it out because you got a plank, a 2x4 in your own eyes. Okay, so don't judge someone harshly just because that person's your leader or has been ordained. Likewise, Galatians 6, Bob read for us. When a brother is caught in a sin, restore him gently, looking to yourself, lest you fall into the same sin. So when we see someone fall into sin, there's opportunity for our sinful natures to be prideful. Oh, I haven't done that. And so then we're prideful, and then we become susceptible to falling. And so Paul tells us there, as somebody falls into sin, that we restore them gently, looking to ourselves, and making sure, am I susceptible to this too? And being humble about it so that we don't fall into that same sin. And only just taking care of ourselves in terms of saying no to sin and yes to righteousness. Okay, so think on these leaders with recognition of your own sin, not with pompous condemnation. And think on them and treat them with gentle grace and care. And then B, realize that all of each Christian's sins and the sins of all believing ordained leaders were paid for in AD 30. Okay, they're no different than you. They're a sinner who's a believer who had all sins on Jesus' body on the cross, and those are all paid for when Jesus was credited with all your and each believer's sins, and here's your blank, punished for them. So 2 Corinthians 5:21 tells us that he who knew no sin, Jesus, who committed no sin, was made sin for us. So that's what happened to Jesus on the cross. He was made sin for us. Or as Peter puts it in 1 Peter 2:22, our sins were placed upon Jesus' body on the cross. And that's why he died. Died for not his own sins, because he didn't have any. Died for our sins. And we call sin, and deal with others, even our leaders, in grace and mercy and humility and forgiveness, just as Jesus has dealt with you. Pastors are in a place, again, no confession coming up here because nothing's happened. Pastors are in a place of great vulnerability, and wouldn't it be great strategy for Satan to take down a pastor, right? All the harm that does to people who've been looking to him for an example, like Peter says in 1 Peter 5, an example to the flock. And so they're under great pressure, and a lot of times they have nowhere to turn when they're under stress. Maybe their wife is stressed, and so they don't want to bring more stress upon their wife, and maybe their congregation is judgy, and so they don't want to talk to somebody in their congregation because then they'll get judged for it. You folks aren't like that. But it's a place of great vulnerability there. So I've all that to say, I've been in the side business of counseling pastors who are no longer pastors because of sin, and it's a place of great pressure, and few outlets to go to. And I remember in one case, the congregation of this man, this word kept coming up with all these different people independently as I talked to them that were in this congregation. And they say, he betrayed us. And I always thought, that's weird. And it is weird. Betrayal is when someone intentionally changes teams for your harm, like Judas, right? He betrayed Jesus. He traded teams. So being with Jesus and the disciples, he was with the Pharisees, and he did it for personal gain, and he did it to Jesus' harm. He turned him over. And these people just felt like, oh, he personally betrayed me. No, and I just always thought, no, he didn't. He was under great pressure, and he went into some sin that had nothing to do with you. It wasn't a sin that was against anybody. It was pornography. It wasn't a sin that was against anybody in his congregation. He wasn't engaged in adultery with anyone in his congregation. He wasn't embezzling from the church. He wasn't lying to people in his church. It had nothing to do with the people who were in his church. He didn't betray them. He just was a person with a sin nature under great pressure, and that was kind of his outlet there. And so, he's a guy to be treated with compassion. And Galatians 6, restored gently. And looking to ourselves and say, you know what? I'm a pastor too. That's a position of, and we all have sin natures. And that's a position where, boy, we could be doing the same things. Guys with pornography. We're very visual, guys are. And so we don't look at someone else. And first of all, we look at that and we condemn that sin. And then two, we look to ourselves and say, man, look at what happened to him. And God wants us to see that. God wants us to see what happens to David here. And he wants us to say, you know what? I need to treat that like that's getting behind a diesel truck and just getting in the exhaust pipe and breathing in real deeply, right? Well, that's not good for me. I want to see this as like a hot lava rock to not pick up. This is not good for me. That gives me Johnny Tremaine hand, right? Johnny Tremaine fans, melted face there, a melted hand. And so, but we deal with people with gentleness, realizing, you know what? These sins, even these sins of pastors, they were all forgiven on the cross. And we restore them, as Paul says, in gentleness. And you'll see good things for David next week as we talk about this. Now, just quick qualification here. This assumes that the author is not acting in a way to harm the church. Okay, this assumes that the officer has just fallen into some kind of sin. Scripture deals with people. Paul and John deal with people who are in the church trying to do the church harm. Jesus deals with people who are in the church, the people of God, trying to do the church, the people of God, harm. Those people were the Pharisees. And he has it out with them a lot. Read John 5 through 8. Gospel of John 5 through 8. Man, that is steaming conversation. He is throwing darts, man. Because these guys are saying, don't follow the only person on earth who can save you. That's doing as much harm as you can to God's people as possible. All right? That's what the Pharisees were doing. And when Paul, there are people who are trying to harm the church, Paul calls them out by name. John, same thing. Diotrephes, 3 John 9. He says, don't follow this guy. He's going for his own prominence and his own harm in the church. So someone's out for the harm of the church and getting people to go in a way that's either a sinful pattern or something like that. Don't follow them. So we're not saying that. We're talking about ordained leaders who fall into sin. Who are just out of weakness and following their sinful nature, not trying to harm the church. Okay? Now, number five. If God should discipline or even remove an ordained leader from church office, don't bag. Okay, our little slang term there. Don't bag following ordained leadership. Because one receives discipline or because one is removed. Don't bag following ordained leadership and conclude, I should go independent. That's your blank. I should go independent. Don't conclude that. That's a wrong conclusion based on one person who has a sinful nature, who is in ordained church leadership, who probably did much good for the church during their time of serving, but then came to a period of weakness and where it got off the path. But don't conclude I should go independent or bag the idea of following ordained church leadership. And so chapter 5, verse 2, God puts leadership and ordains leadership in place for his people. A king to shepherd his people. Deuteronomy 17, that's where God through Moses says, when you get into the promised land, parentheses, in order to follow all this law, which includes the sacrifices to cover your sins, in order to keep the temple up and running so that you're in a constant state of grace in the midst of your sinful natures in the promised land, in order to stay in the promised land and not get exiled, Deuteronomy 17, select a king from among you. One I will choose, the Lord says, who will act not like a king from the nations, but for your interests. So that's God's design. Judges 21:25. It's the conclusion of God's people get into the promised land and they don't get a king for themselves. And they live for hundreds of years in the promised land without a king under these various judges that were sporadic, people like Samson, not much of a spiritual hero there. God works through him nonetheless, but he's an adulterer and a man of great rage and just not much self-control on Samson's part. But the mantra throughout the book of Judges, and in that day there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes, not what was right in God's eyes. And why? Because in those days there was no king in Israel. What leads to God's people being oppressed over and over and over for hundreds of years by foreign kings? It's that they didn't have their own king that God had prescribed for them in Deuteronomy 17. There was no king that God had chosen for them in Israel, and so everyone did what was right in his own eyes. It was chaos. You had Levites joining up with prostitutes. You had Levites who had their own collection of idols in the book of Judges. Okay, that's how bad things were in Israel. Acts 6, 1-7. God's design is in the church, there are needs in the church, and so he ordains deacons. Acts chapter 6, it's God's solution, ordained leadership in the church. 1 Timothy 3, 1-13. God ordains leadership, deacons and elders he names. And he says, Timothy, you need to ordain deacons and elders in the church there in Ephesus in 1 Timothy 3. And then Titus 1 we read. Bob read for us this morning. Paul had just he was out of his imprisonment at the end of the book of Acts, Acts 28. He's out of his imprisonment, and he comes down to the island of Crete, and he evangelizes that island there, and he's got Titus with him. And then when he's getting ready to leave the island of Crete, it's like the summer of 64. Is that Brian Adams, or was he 65? 69? Okay. So summer of 64, and he leaves Titus there. And you see that. And so he's up in Miletus near Ephesus in the fall of 64, and he writes this letter to Titus, whom he's left on the island of Crete. And he says that right in the letter. Bob read it for us. The reason I left you there, Titus, was that you might appoint elders in every town. So each town was to have their own set of elders there. So that's God's design, and very much not only Old Testament do we see elders present, and kings, but also in the New Testament, God's design. So you should not be a Christ follower who is, one word, apart. A-P-A-R-T, one word, not two, one word. I should not be a Christ follower who is apart from shepherds for your soul who know you. You should not just be an independent Christ follower. That's very popular today. I'm a Christ follower, and sometimes the subtext of that is I'm not in a church anywhere. Okay? But instead, be a Christ follower who's a member of a church who has a shepherd who is over your soul, an overseer who knows you by name and is individually helping to shepherd you as a person because he knows you and he knows your spouse and he knows your kids or he knows your parents or whatever your situation is. So 5:2, again, David's role was to be a shepherd of God's people. John 10:14, look at the front of your bulletin there. John 10:14, under our declaration of the gospel. Look at that. John 10:14, I am the good shepherd, Jesus says. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. I lay down my life for the sheep. This is what you want for your soul. Someone who will sacrifice himself for you. Now, Jesus has done that in the big sense, but then he ordains underneath him human shepherds, elders, to do his shepherding, to assist him in his shepherding of you. 1 Peter 5:1, Bob read for us. Peter says, to the elders among you, be shepherds of God's flock that is under your care. See how personal and individual that is? Peter says, be shepherds to the flock of God, the sheep that are under your care. And Peter, if you look at the front of that letter, he was writing to all these different regions. And the letter was being circulated all over what was Turkey, all over Turkey there. But he says, you elders, be shepherds of the people that are under you. You in Cappadocia, be shepherds of those sheep. You in Asia, be shepherds of those sheep. You in Bithynia, be shepherds of those sheep there. Be shepherds of the sheep that are under your care, being examples to the flock. You as a Christian need an elder who is an example to you, that you can watch them speak and interact with people. You can learn things about their lives and how they deal with things in their business setting, or how they deal with things with their kids or at home or with their aging parents or whatever. You need that. Being examples to the flock. And then verse 5, he says, young men, be submissive to your elders. Okay, so that's God's design there, that you have ordained leaders over you to shepherd you, filling in for Jesus in the flesh, filling in for David in the flesh as a ruler and shepherd over you. Okay. So B. One ordained leader's discipline or removal does not cancel the God-established offices of deacon and elder. So just to state that a little bit differently, one ordained leader's discipline or removal does not cancel out God's established offices of deacon and elder. You see here that in verses 11 and 12, and then that the penalty that David experiences in Nathan's pronouncement of judgment, chapter 13, or chapter 12 there, in verses 11 and 12. The penalty for this is not that the kingship is dissolved. You see that? Now, whether David holds on, so the office is going to extend. Whether David holds on to this is kind of up to him and his response. Chapter 7, verses 14 through 16 get at this. When David was talking about the kingship that he was giving to David and his sons in the Davidic covenant, chapter 7, verse 14, if you want to, you can flip back there. This talks about how the office extends even when the officers cease to be officers and be in that role. Okay? Chapter 7, verse 14. God speaks of the king of Israel, and he says, I will be his father, any currently reigning son of David. I will be his father, and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him, God says, with the rod of men, with floggings inflicted by men. So foreign armies may come and beat his army as discipline to him. But my love will never be taken away from him as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. And then verse 16, your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. So leadership by ordained leaders is established forever. And so God has that through David, through David's sons, and then he continues it on through himself, Jesus being king, and then appointing and ordaining elders in the church. And, Paul's always anxious for this. And Acts chapter 14, all these churches that he's established in Iconium and Lystra and Derbe and the Pisidian Antioch. He goes back to these churches and gets elders for all these churches. Because it's God's design for us to have human beings who know us and can shepherd us. And now you may have one of those ordained officers, hopefully not any of us, sin in such a way that they can no longer serve in that role. But you always need to be looking for somebody in that role for you and for the good of your soul. That's God's design. So David, through the history of Israel, certain kings are wicked, and he removes them, God does. But he brings another son of David along, because each person in God's kingdom needs a son of David to rule them, to shepherd them for their own good, for their for their protection, for their leadership that they need. So an individual may cease to lead and shepherd, but the office of elder goes on, because see here in your outline, shepherding rulership of God's people by kings and elders is God's, what we've been saying over and over, God's design. It's God's design for his people's well-being. Okay, so again, we don't want to be like Judges, having no, the book of Judges 20, 21, 25. We don't want to have no king. We don't want to have no shepherd who knows us by name. Okay, one of the nice things, one of the good benefits of being in a smaller church, no sin in being in a larger church. But one of the nice benefits of being in a smaller church is, guess what? Your elders know you by name. And they know your kids by name. They know what's going on in your life. One of the most heartwarming things I read, we signed that card for these folks who've been supporting our church for the 20 years of its existence. And some of you wrote on there, all my kids have grown up in this church. And they're doing great. Or I've been in this, some of you kids wrote on there, I've been in this church all my life. And I thought, wow. One, that was satisfying for me. But two, I thought, how satisfying this is going to be. And I sent that off. And so they probably got it like Thursday. How satisfying for them to say, you know what? We supported something where these kids had a shepherd who knew them by name. And these shepherds who are taking care of them all this time, and they're doing well. That's a nice thing about being in a smaller church. You can't get lost. That's why we lose people sometimes from our church. Sometimes it's just too personal for people. And we don't get in anyone's face or call anyone out or say, stand up, Matthew, and tell us your greatest sin. Unless you want to, but we don't want to hear it. But it's sometimes it's just, people realize, sometimes people come in here and they're in here for about 2 months and they say, this is great, I'm learning God's word. Oh, he's asking me to repent too? And it's just a little too personal. I just want a church I could come into that approved the things I already believed. Not a church that challenged me indirectly, just through the broad general preaching of every week and the teaching and the fellowship of believers that goes on. But that's a good thing for us. And so Titus 1:5 tells us to be be under ordained leadership. Hebrews 13:17, it says, obey your leaders and submit to their leadership, for they keep watch over your souls. There are a couple of terms that are used for elders. There's one, shepherd. There's elder, which is the same word as old person, like in our language, elder. That's presbyter. That's where we get Presbyterian. If you want to call someone an old guy, you could say he's a presbyter. He's an older person. But those are also called shepherds, and they're also called overseers. And in 1 Peter 1 and 2, you see Peter use all those terms. Shepherd the flock. You elders, fellow elders with me, shepherd the flock of God among you, serving as overseers. He uses all three terms. Overseers is episkopos, where we get the term Episcopalian. And that's the idea of having a bishop or an episcopos looking over you. But it's all one office, and we see it here in 1 Peter 5, 1 and 2, and also in Titus 1. But you want someone who is overseeing your soul, a bishop over your soul, who's a pastor, or these elders to you. An elder, someone who's mature, an elder, an old guy in the faith, someone who's more mature, someone who's ripened in a good way in the faith, and someone who is a shepherd and looks at you as one of God's sheep, who says, these are Christ's sheep, not mine, so I need to take care of them. I need to make sure they're doing okay. I don't own these sheep. My Father owns these sheep. So I need to make sure they're doing okay. And so we want this for us. So summary for you here. Church officers will sin. Church officers will sin. Hopefully, for all of us, they'll just be lesser sins, just normal things of, occasionally throughout the day, being selfish or doing the thing that's easy instead of the thing that's loving neighbor as self. But church officers will sin, but leadership by ordained church officers will still be God's design. Leadership by ordained church officers will still be God's design for the good of your soul. It's God's design for the good of your soul to have ordained church officers who know you by name. Let's pray.